Draw your last pathetic card so I can end this, Yugi. My grandpa's commander deck has no cards, Kaiba, but it does contain the unstoppable Thassa's Oracle. Ugh! Impossible!
You're watching Video of Greed, which allows you to add 10 additional cards to your commander decks.
Hey, Scoville here. Hello everyone, but a special hello to people who've purchased an apple in the last 24 hours. I'm getting better, not 100%, but I don't sound like I'm struggling to breathe anymore. We're going to point a spicy spotlight on 10 more cards. Let me know in the comments if you're already running these in a spicy brew, or now have plans to spice up a deck. Number 1. If you've never seen a card with Aftermath before, the way to read them is like A to B, so this card is Driven to Despair. Driven is a sorcery for 1 generic and 1 green mana with until end of turn, creatures you control gain trample, and whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. If you're looking for some explosive card draw in a creature-based deck, this might be a great budget include for you. I love that this effect sits at just 2 mana as well. A lot of your other higher impact card draw in green sits at 3 to 5 mana. I think this could also be a nice card draw piece to help you stay under the radar. If you have something like Toski, Bearer of Secrets, or Beast Whisperer, or the Great Henge out, other players might evaluate you as a larger threat. If you just have 1 explosive turn with card draw, you might be able to refill your hand without people getting all up in arms. Let's look at the Aftermath portion of this card. For those of you who don't know, a card with Aftermath can be cast from your graveyard on its Aftermath side, but then the card is exiled. So after you've cast Driven, you can later cast Despair, which is a sorcery for 1 generic and 1 black mana, with until end of turn, creatures you control gain Menace, and whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, that player discards a card. Okay, forget what I just said about not being perceived as a threat. Now the table's going to hate you. But only if you use 4 mana to do both of these effects on the same turn. If you're in a go-wide tokens deck, probably like Lathril, Blade of the Elves, this gets out of hand. I like the options that you get with this. If someone counters Driven, you can cast Despair later. Anyways, now it's your turn to break the card. Number 2. Dire Undercurrents is an enchantment for 3 generic and 2 Dimir mana, so that can be either blue or black in each case. With whenever a blue creature comes into play under your control, you may have target player draw a card, and whenever a black creature comes into play under your control, you may have target player discard a card. There might be a deck where this is just a generic incremental value piece, but there are so many ways to go infinite with enter the battlefield effects in blue and black that that's where I think this card belongs. It's funny to me to see this card at nearly a $10 price point since I've never seen it, but hey, this is why we want reprints, right? Number 3. Jagged Poppet is a 3/4 Ogre Warrior creature for 1 generic, 1 black, and 1 red mana, with whenever Jagged Poppet is dealt damage, discard that many cards, and Hellbent. Whenever Jagged Poppet deals combat damage to a player, if you have no cards in hand, that player discards cards equal to the damage. You may be noticing a theme here. Don't worry, it's not like I'm suggesting cards I was looking at for fun discard combos. Anyways, Hellbent is an ability that triggers only if you have no cards in hand. Let me know how you would break this little guy. Number 4. Mask of the Schemer is an equipment for 2 generic and 1 blue mana that costs 2 generic mana to equip and has whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, it connives X, where X is the amount of damage it dealt to that player. The way connive works is that you draw a card, then discard the same number of cards as the connive amount, but you also get to put a +1/+1 counter on the conniving creature for each non-land card discarded. I know someone out there is running creature and combat themed blue decks. This is for you, or mono blue Voltron, or maybe you're cultured and run mono blue Reanimator. I think this card is really interesting because there have been a series of equipments in the past few years dedicated to each color that have an effect that scales with the amount of damage your creature deals. And this one was really cheap at 15 cents. Honestly, I think this has a home in any graveyard deck that happens to have blue, so like Wilhelt the Rock Cleaver, Lazov the Multifarious, the Mimeoplasm, or maybe Ludovic Necrogenius. Oh, we're halfway there. It's number 5. Entangler is an enchantment aura for 2 generic and 2 white mana with enchant creature. Enchanted creature may block any number of creatures. First off, I love the art on this card. The dynamic pose here makes me think generically of anime, but the outfit is now making me think of Lilu in the 5th Element. Find a home for this card, but here's a spicy little combo for you. You can pair Entangler with Engulfing Slagworm, which is a creature that destroys any creature it blocks or becomes blocked by. You also gain life equal to the toughness of the creatures destroyed that way. Now, no one can swing into you. You can also do some nonsense with Assembled Alphas, which forces your opponents to take 3 damage to their creature and themselves for every creature that it blocks. Maybe these will go as cool finishers in a deck where you're planning on goading all your opponent's creatures. When it gets down to you and the last player, forcing their board to swing into this nonsense could be fun. Number 6. Spellbinding Soprano is a 2/2 human bard creature that costs 1 generic and 1 red mana and has whenever Spellbinding Soprano attacks, instant and sorcery spells you cast this turn cost 1 less to cast, and an encore cost of 3 generic and 1 red mana. You can activate the encore ability of a creature from your graveyard, which exiles it and creates a token copy of that creature for each opponent you have. Those tokens have haste, have to attack each opponent, and are sacrificed at the beginning of the end step. I've said before that cost reduction abilities can get expensive in Commander, like Urza's Incubator or the set of medallions for each color, so my eyes light up anytime I come across cards that can generically reduce mana costs. Let's move on to number 7. Termination Facilitator is a 1/3 human assassin creature for 1 generic and 1 black mana with tap. Put a bounty counter on target creature or planeswalker. Activate only as a sorcery. And whenever a creature or planeswalker an opponent controls with a bounty counter on it is dealt damage, destroy it. I don't have an Assassin's deck, but Wizards has been printing more and more of them lately, so maybe you have one. Have you seen this guy? I like the idea of using him as a politics piece. Yeah, you play your hand a little, but you can make deals with the player who's behind, who's trying to stave off a bigger threat, and would normally be losing all their trades in combat. Be careful though. Its ability is only at sorcery speed, so you can't get too tricky with this card. Number 8 is Ather Plasm. For 2 generic and 2 blue mana, you get a 1/1 illusion creature with whenever Ather Plasm blocks a creature, you may return Ather Plasm to its owner's hand. If you do, you may put a creature card from your hand into play, blocking that creature. This is really janky, but I've been wanting a deck that could run Trove of Temptation for a while, and maybe a deck with Ather Plasm is the way to go. As I've been doing this, I keep coming across interesting illusion creatures. I personally don't have any big Eldrazi decks, but if you've got a mono blue big creatures deck, then Ather Plasm is a sweet include that could help you cheat some costs. Plus, you get to do it again. Number 9 goes to Bone Dancer. For 1 generic and 2 black mana, you get a 2/2 zombie creature with, and I'll read the errata text so it sounds more like a modern card. Whenever Bone Dancer attacks and isn't blocked, you may put the top creature card of defending player's graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. If you do, Bone Dancer assigns no combat damage this turn. There are a lot of decks out there that exile all their opponent's graveyards, or that will fill opponents' graveyards to the max for some value. But I think this would be an interesting challenge to maximize Bone Dancer and maybe some other cards by curating what is in your opponent's graveyards. I don't know all the cards you need for this, but maybe this sparks some curiosity in you. Our final card is Spare from Evil. For 1 generic and 1 white mana, you get an instant with creatures you control gain protection from non-human creatures until end of turn. Is this going to dethrone Teferi's Protection or Heroic Intervention anytime soon? No. Is it kind of a dead card against a humans deck? Yes. But how many people do you know who actually run humans decks? Personally, I haven't run into anyone. And maybe everyone has a humans deck but just doesn't get it out every game. This could be used defensively, but the thing I love about protection is that it also means you can't be blocked by the things you have protection from. I read this as 2 mana, creatures you control can't be blocked this turn, except by humans. There's more to it than that, but if you've got an aggro deck in white, this might be the combat trick that you've been looking for. That's all for today. Thanks for listening.